Welcome back. In this video we'll be talking about the first chapter of the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is great. One of the best books, I think, on communication and on dealing with people. I actually started rereading it again. Highly recommend it. And the first chapter that we're going to be talking about is called If You Want to Gather Honey, Don't Kick Over the Beehive. And basically the main idea of this chapter is to not criticize, condemn or complain. It's that simple, very simple rule, but also a very important one, which we can often very easily overlook. Because you see, no one likes those kind of people that complain all the time or criticize you or condemn other people all the time. So just don't do it. It's that simple. See, even if someone made a mistake, even if someone made you frustrated or very angry, don't criticize him, don't go all out on him, because almost every single time it never leads to a good outcome. It never makes things better. It only makes things worse. And you see, what I will also add to this principle, which is not mentioned in the book, it talks about not doing these things to other people. But I would also say, never criticize, condemn, and complain to yourself. Because it's just as useless, and it's just as negative, and it's just as bad as doing it to other people. And we'll talk about that later in the video. So why should we not complain or criticize or condemn other people? Because you see, when we do this, it puts the other person on the defensive. And it encourages him to justify himself. Because you see, no one likes to blame himself. And usually we don't. Usually we don't blame ourselves for what happens. We blame someone else. We blame our circumstances for what happened. And especially when someone is criticizing us. I mean, for example, just think about this when you tell someone that you see, oh, you're always late, how could you do this? Or you never seem to listen what I have to say. Or your work is always sloppy, it's full of mistakes. How can you do something like that? On and on. Most of the time, people don't respond to that with saying, you know what, you're actually right, thank you for saying that. No, most of the time, people get defensive. They feel hurt and they try to justify their actions and tell you that no, I am actually right, you see, and you're wrong. Your criticism is not right and I am actually in the right here. But you see, even if the other person doesn't get defensive after criticism, what happens is that it hurts the other person's pride and ego. It wounds his sense of importance. And because of this, it builds up resentment. Because you see, we people like to feel important. We like to feel like that we're being heard, that people are listening to us, and we don't like to feel inferior to other people. But you see, when you're criticizing someone, even if you're right, the other person will feel like you're putting him down. It will feel like you're belittling him. Or it might even feel like you're saying that you are better than him, and it will hurt his pride, it will hurt his ego. And he will build up resentment towards you. So you see, criticizing, condemning, complaining, it's useless. And it also never brings you any good. It always leads to a bad outcome. It leads to resentment, other people feeling hurt. And even if you want to correct someone's behavior, criticism is not the way to go about it. I mean, I learned this in school, for example. Let me tell you the story of two teachers that we had. You see, one of the teachers always criticized us, you see. He always shouted at us and she was so annoying. No one liked her. But you see, there was another teacher that praised us. You see, he praised and encouraged the very little things that they were to praise. Even if someone was, very bad, this teacher was teaching mathematics. Even if someone was very bad at math, he went there and helped that person out. He encouraged and praise the little things that there was to encourage. And you see, everyone liked the second teacher, the math teacher. Everyone liked him and respected him. Well, maybe not everyone liked him, but everyone respected him, that's for sure. But absolutely no one liked the first teacher. Everyone hated her. Are you starting to see that by criticizing other people and condemning them, it just builds up resentment in them. It never leads to a good outcome. And you see, this is also very interesting, and this is a fact. It has been shown in studies that people who are rewarded for good behavior learn much more effectively than those punished for bad behavior. So you see, praise and encouragement works, criticism doesn't. And you see, I think that the only place where criticism is actually good and it works is in close friend groups. It's in close male, I don't know, I'm not sure in female. I can't talk about female friendship because I have no experience in that. But it does work, I think, and in my experience, criticism does work in close male friendship with your brothers, with people that you're close with. Because you see, sometimes you just need this slap in the face, this slap of honesty and truth coming from your friends. Your friends calling you out on your bullshit and criticizing you. Sometimes you need that. But you see, this criticism comes from a place of love. Because you see, when one of your great friends tells you that, what are you doing with your life? Like, get your shit together, bro. Like, I'm disappointed in you. Like this, it shakes you up. And it's not like you're hurt by it. I mean, if you're not a bitch, you're not hurt by it. You're actually like moved by it. So it shakes you up and it makes you realize that, damn, you're actually right. Like it makes you grateful for that friend, that he's honest with you, that he calls you out on your bullshit. So I think that that's one situation where criticism can actually be helpful. Otherwise, I don't think that in any situation, criticism, condemning other people is any good. It always leads to bad outcomes. You see, one of the best examples of this principle in practice is that of Abraham Lincoln. You see, when I read about his story, like it really surprised me, the character that he had and the importance of not complaining, of not condemning other people, and of forgiveness, of understanding. You see, one of the reasons why Lincoln was so great and he was so good at dealing with other people is because he didn't criticize or condemn others. You see, this wasn't always like this. Lincoln actually used to criticize and make fun of a lot of people when he was younger. He used to write these letters where he would ridicule other people, and he would leave these in the town where there were a lot of people, and it was sure that someone would find it and read it. But you see, one time this letter writing went completely wrong. See, one time he wrote a letter where he ridiculed and criticized some kind of politician. And somehow his letter got published in a newspaper. And the whole town was roaring with laughter because of his letter. And when the politician found out who wrote that letter, he challenged Lincoln to a duel. I mean, just imagine how crazy that is, being challenged to a fight to the death because of a letter that you wrote. And then Lincoln couldn't really get out of this without damaging his honor or something like that. So he even took like some kind of sword fighting classes for this duel. And when they met for the duel on the side of some kind of river, in the last second before they would start a fight to the death, I don't know, some kind of people stopped them, but still it's so crazy. And this really taught Lincoln a lesson. And ever since that, he never wrote any of those letters. And he almost never criticized anyone for anything. And he never ridiculed anyone. I mean, just imagine how like shocking that lesson was. I mean, he almost died because of a letter that he wrote. You see, when his wife or other people around him would criticize others, he would always tell them, don't criticize them because they are just what we would be under similar circumstances. And one of his favorite quotations and favorite quotes was, judge not that ye be not judged. But you see, if anyone had the right to complain, it was Lincoln. Let me tell you another crazy story that just shows the character that Lincoln had. You see, it's 1863, and it's the Battle of Gettysburg, however you spell that. And this battle lasted 3 days. Now, I'm not sure about the history, who fought who, why did they fight, but basically, the leader of the enemy's army was a guy called Lee. You see, Lincoln was doing great in this battle. And on the last day, Lee and his army started retreating. But you see, on that day, there was a huge storm. But you see, on that day, there was a huge storm and it was raining heavily. And as the enemy was retreating, they came across a very strong river and they couldn't cross the river. And in front of them was this river that they couldn't cross. And behind them was Lincoln's army, who was coming right towards them. So they were trapped. They couldn't pass the river. They had no chance of escaping. And Lincoln saw this golden opportunity to capture Lee and to stop the war right there. And he commanded to the general to take immediate action and to go right at them. And what do you think? What did the general do? He did the exact opposite. He didn't attack. He made excuses. He hesitated. He procrastinated until the waters calmed down and the enemy team was able to escape. And now imagine how Lincoln reacted to that. Imagine the anger that he had, how furious he must have been. I mean, they were right there. They just had to reach out and they could have ended the war. But the general just didn't listen to the commands. And in disappointment, Lincoln sat down and wrote this letter to the general. He wrote, "My dear general, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within our easy grasp, and to have closed upon him within connection with our other late successes would have ended the war. As it is, the war will be prolonged indefinitely. If you could not safely attack Lee last Monday, how can you possibly do so south of the river, when you can take with you very few, no more than 2/3 of the force you then had in hand? It will be unreasonable to expect, and I do not expect, that you can now effect much. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it." Now what do you think? What did the general do after reading this letter? You see, he never saw this letter. Lincoln never sent it out. It was found among his papers after his death. And here is what the author of this book thought. But this is what he guesses what happened. He said that, "My guess is that after writing that letter, Lincoln looked out of the window and said to himself, 'Just a minute. Maybe I ought not to be so hasty. It is easy enough for me to sit here in the quiet of the White House and order Meade, the general, to attack. But if I had been up at Gettysburg, and if I had seen as much blood as Meade has seen during the last week, and if my ears had been pierced with the screams and shrieks of the wounded and dying, maybe I wouldn't be so anxious to attack either. If I had Meade's timid temperament, perhaps I would have done just what he had done. Anyhow, it is water under the bridge now. If I send this letter, it will relieve my feelings. It will make Meade try to justify himself. It will make him condemn me. It will arouse hard feelings, impair all his further usefulness as a commander, and perhaps force him to resign from the army." Now, of course, this is just a guess. And probably Lincoln just wrote that letter and put it in his drawer and never sent it. And the story was probably something like this. But just think about how crazy that is. Just think about the level of self-control and understanding and forgiveness that Lincoln had to not send out that letter and to not lash out on the general and to not criticize him. I mean, it really shows the character of Lincoln. It really shows how true this quote is, that a great man shows his greatness by the way he treats little men. Because you see, any fool can complain, and most of the fools do complain. But you see, it takes a strong character and self-control to respond with understanding and with forgiveness. You see, I really like reading about these stories and the story of Lincoln. It really shows you that it is possible to respond in a different way with understanding, with forgiveness, and that it is a better response. And the evidence for that is just how good of a president Lincoln was and how good of a leader he was. Now let me tell you another great example of how you can respond to a crazy situation without criticism and with understanding. See, around the 1900s, the end of the 1900s, Bob Hoover was a great pilot. He was a very famous test pilot and a performer at air shows. And you see, one time while he was doing one of these air shows, while he was in the air, two of the engines just stopped working in the plane. You see, I mean, it must have been crazy, but somehow he managed to maneuver his way down to the ground and land the plane safely. And I mean, the plane was damaged pretty badly. I mean, it was crashed. They couldn't use it anymore. But everyone survived in the plane. And you see, the first thing he did when he did this emergency landing was that he checked the fuel of the engines. And see, what he found was what he guessed that happened. Someone had put the wrong fuel in the engine. Someone put jet fuel instead of gasoline in the engine. When Hoover returned to the airport, he wanted to see the mechanic that was responsible for this mistake. And you see, the mechanic was a young guy, you see, and just imagine how he must have felt. He almost caused the death of 3 people. And because of his mistake, they lost a very expensive World War III plane. And you see, as Hoover was approaching this young mechanic, he was like, you know, the tears were running down his face. I mean, I just can't even imagine how he must have felt. And you see, Hoover was probably also very angry. He had every right to do so. And you probably might guess that, you know, he would have, you know, went all out on him, shouted at him, criticized him. How could you do something like him? But he did nothing of a kind. You see, when he approached the mechanic, he didn't scold him. He put his arm around his shoulders and he told him, to show you, I'm sure, that you'll never do this again, I want you to service my F-51 tomorrow. Just think about like how crazy that is. He almost died, and he almost died in a plane crash because of this guy's mistake. And he says to him, you know what? I mean, he responds with this to show you, I'm sure, that you'll never do this again. I want you to service my F-51 tomorrow. Imagine the character that you have to respond in this way, to not let anger take control over you, and to lash out on that young mechanic, but to respond with understanding and forgiveness. I mean, this is such a crazy story. So you see, instead of condemning people, let's try to understand them. And let's realize that criticism, condemning others, complaining all the time, it never brings any good. It always leads to a bad outcome. It just makes things worse. And now if you're interested, I didn't talk in this video about complaining because I made a whole video just separately on why it's completely useless. Why it's completely useless to complain. And why it's also completely useless to complain to yourself. If you're interested, link in the description. Also, as we said, I think that it's also important to say to never criticize, condemn, and complain, not even to yourself. To not criticize yourself, to not be negative towards yourself, but also have understanding and forgiveness towards yourself. Because it's just the same as with other people. It builds up resentment inside of you. It makes you negative. And then just in the same way, it's completely useless to condemn, criticize, or complain to yourself. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. If you have any other thoughts, very excited to read your comments actually. And if you're interested, I'm doing free one-on-one calls. You can send me an email, we'll arrange a video call, and you can ask me anything that you could want. We can have a chat. So if you're interested, email in the description. Thank you for watching this video, thank you for being here. Hope it was helpful, hope you learned something valuable in this video. And thank you for your presence. All the love towards you, hope you have a great day and goodbye.